Chapter 47 of American History Stories, Volume 2. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. American History Stories, Volume 2, by Laura L. Pratt. Chapter 47, Nancy Hart. Nancy Hart was known throughout the South in Revolutionary times as the Giantess and the heroine of Virginia. She lived in the wild woods and supported herself and her children by hunting, fishing, and trapping. Nancy was not handsome, as she stood over 6 feet in height, her mop of red hair bundled into a big coil, and her crooked eyes staring and winking as was their custom. But for all her uncouth appearance, one who knew her said, her voice was quiet and soft, and if she had the bravery and courage of a man, she had beneath it all the warm, tender heart of a woman. She was a fierce supporter of the Whig party from the very outset. One day 6 British soldiers, pursuing deserters, came to her cabin for food. While they were eating, she hid their guns, drove away their horses, locked her doors, and found a way to send word to her neighbors, "I have trapped 6 Tories. Come and help me." During one winter, dressed as a man, she used often to go to the British camp, and with her sharp, clear perception she would learn what was going on within and carry the news to the Whigs. One day she met a little pale-faced British soldier. Taking his gun from him, she marched him on before her into the Georgian camp. The Georgian colonel had great confidence in her power and wisdom, so much so that he once put her in charge of a fort filled with women and children. Nancy proved, before the colonel's return, that she was equal to the occasion. A company of skirmishers attacked it. Nancy, in uniform, forced the frightened women to put on their husbands' clothes and present themselves upon the walls. She herself kept up meanwhile a steady firing from the old cannon. "I understood the soldiers had gone with Colonel Clark, but the fort seems only too well manned. We may as well march," said their leader. When the war was over, a few squatters, as they were called, came into the country, not far from Nancy's cabin. Nancy fled into the wilderness of Kentucky. "So many neighbors," said she, "leave me no air to breathe." Chapter 47. Chapter 48 of American History Stories, Volume 2. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. American History Stories, Volume 2, by Laura L. Pratt. Chapter 48. Lafayette. During this war, the French were our firm allies against the English. One Frenchman, Marquis de Lafayette, was so much in sympathy with us that, nobleman that he was, he left his home and his country to join our army and fight for our cause. He was young, only 19 years of age, wealthy and blessed with everything that should bind his heart to his own home. But so great was his sympathy with the struggling colonies that he was willing to give up all and come to America. "I have always held the cause of America dear," said he. "Now I go to serve it personally." When he arrived, the first act of generosity was to supply clothing and arms to the South Carolina troops, then in great distress. He wrote at once to Washington, saying, "The moment I heard of America, I loved her. The moment I heard she was fighting for liberty, I burned with a desire to bleed for her." Lafayette was so long in this country, and so much heart and soul with us in our fight for independence, that whenever he referred to the Revolution after his return to France, he spoke of himself as an American. One evening, in 1824, while visiting Boston, Mrs. Josiah Quincy said to him, "The American cockade was black and white, was it not, General?" "Yes, madam," he replied. "It was black at first, but when the French came and joined us, we added the white in compliment to them." At the siege of Yorktown, in the attack which hastened to surrender Cornwallis, Lafayette and his American division captured one redoubt some minutes before the French carried the redoubt which they commanded. "You don't remember me, General," cried an old soldier, pressing through the crowd at the State House to welcome Lafayette on his arrival in Boston. The general looked at him keenly, holding the hand of the old man, who added, "I was close to you when we stormed our redoubt at Yorktown. I was just behind Captain Smith. You remember Captain Smith? He was shot through the head just as he mounted the redoubt." "Yes, yes, I remember," answered Lafayette, his face lightening up. "Poor Captain Smith! But we beat the French! We beat the French!" At the surrender of Cornwallis, the American troops were drawn up on the right and the French troops on the left of the road, along which the British army marched in solemn silence. Lafayette, noticing that the English soldiers looked only at the Frenchmen on the left and ignored the American light infantry, the pride of his heart, and being determined to bring their eyes to the right, ordered the band to strike up "Yankee Doodle." "Then," said he, narrating the story, "they did look at us, but were not very well pleased." Chapter 49 of American History Stories, Volume 2. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. American History Stories, Volume 2, by Laura L. Pratt. Chapter 49. The Punning Parson. At the beginning of the war, the pastor of the Hollis Street Church, Boston, was Matthew Byles. He was as staunch a Tory as many of his brothers were Whigs. No matter what rebukes or what threats were hurled at him, he would not be crushed. His fire of sarcasm was hot as ever, and his fund of humor never failed him. At last he was removed from his pastorate, and a guard placed over him. "Sir," said he, as the officer paced back and forth, "how nobly I am guarded!" Later the guard was removed, and then later still replaced. "See now," said Matthew, "how carefully I am regarded." And again, when the guard was removed, for good and all, this impressible old man cried out, "Behold, I have been guarded, regarded, and now I am disregarded." Once while the sentinel was pacing up and down in front of his premises, the doctor persuaded him to go on an errand, and while he was absent he shouldered the musket and kept guard over himself, much to the amusement of passers-by. He used to call the sentinel his observatory. The early history of Boston is full of stories of this odd, fun-loving parson. In early Boston poetry are found the following verses: "Here's Punning Byles provokes our smiles, a man of stately parts, he visits folks to crack his jokes, which never mend their hearts. With strutting gait and wig so great, he walks along the streets, and throws out wit, or what's like it, to every one he meets." Chapter 50 of American History Stories, Volume 2. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. American History Stories, Volume 2, by Laura L. Pratt. Chapter 50. Provost Cunningham. Among the last things of the Revolution that the colonists loved to tell were these two stories of Provost Cunningham of the British troops. In Murray Street, New York City, stood a little tavern called Day's Tavern. Day had raised above his building the new American flag. Cunningham, hardly yet ready to surrender his command, seeing this flag, marched up to the tavern door. "Come, you cur," he shouted to Mr. Day. "I give you 2 minutes to haul down that rag. I'll have no such striped rag as that flying in the face of His Majesty's forces." "There it is, and there it shall stay," said Day, quietly but firmly. Cunningham turned to his guard. "Arrest that man," he ordered, "and as for this thing here, I'll haul it down myself." And seizing the halyards, he began to lower the flag. The crowd broke into fierce murmurs, uncertain what to do. But in the midst of the tumult, the door of the tavern flew open, and forth sallied Mrs. Day, armed with her trusty broom. "Hands off that flag, you villain, and drop my husband!" she cried, and before the astonished Cunningham could realize the situation, the broom came down, thwack, thwack, upon his powdered wig. How the powder flew from the stiff white wig, and how, amidst jeers and laughter, the defeated provost marshal withdrew from the unequal contest, and fled before the sweep of Mrs. Day's all-conquering broom. Another incident is told of the same day. Sir Guy Carleton, commander-in-chief of all His Majesty's forces in the colonies, stood at the foot of the flagstaff on the northern bastion of Fort George. Before him filed the departing troops of his king. As the commander-in-chief passed down to the boats, to the strains of martial music, the red cross of St. George, England's royal flag, came fluttering down from its high staff on the northern bastion, and the last of the rear guard wheeled toward the ship. But Cunningham, the provost marshal, still angered by the scene at Day's tavern, declared roundly that no rebel flag should go up that staff in sight of King George's men. "Come, lively now, you blue jackets!" he shouted, turning to some of the sailors from the fleet. "Unreef the halyards, quick! Slush down the pole! Knock off the stepping cleats! Then let them run their flag up if they can!" His orders were quickly obeyed, and the marshal left the city. In a few minutes, Colonel Jackson, halting before the flagstaff, ordered up the stars and stripes. "The halyards are cut, Colonel," reported the color sergeant. "The cleats are gone, and the pole is slashed." "A mean trick indeed!" exclaimed the indignant colonel. "Who will climb the staff and reel the halyards for the stars and stripes?" "I want no money for the job," said a young sailor lad, as he tried it manfully once, twice, thrice, each time slipping down covered with slush and shame. "If you'll but saw me up some cleats, I'll run that flag to the top, in spite of all the Tories from the Sopus to Sandy Hook." Tying the halyards round his waist, and filling his jacket pockets with cleats and nails, he worked his way up the flagpole, nailing as he went. And now he reached the top. Now the halyards are reefed, and as the beautiful flag goes up the staff, a mighty cheer is heard, and a round of 13 guns salutes the stars and stripes, and the brave soldier lad who did the gallant deed. End of chapter 50.